Great, that's working. So again, welcome to people watching on YouTube, either live or in the future. You're in the right place. This is the Future of Work seminar. And we will shortly be starting with our three speakers and my brief introduction. We're just waiting a couple of minutes for some stragglers to come in. Great. Well, I think I'll make a start and get my introduction out of the way, and then we can get on to the real business. Welcome to the third event in the RCA Service Design WiP Show. Welcome indeed to Generation Regeneration, the Service Design at the Royal College of Art 2021 WiP Show. This is the third event in a series celebrating the work of 75 students working in teams across 20 projects in 5 thematic studios that we have slightly confusingly organized into 6 different events over this week, starting yesterday and finishing tomorrow lunchtime. Each of these themes works on a range of vital topics of the moment, from healthcare to urban renewal, next generation interfaces, and beyond, including today's event, which is on the future of work. The students' work we are showcasing are here. This was in fact my first day. My name is Clive Gillio. I'm the head of service design at the Royal College of Art. And I arrived back in September 2019 to meet the students who you are seeing today. But of course, as time has marched on and the pandemic has changed all our lives, we now meet on Zoom. And I'm glad to say that the resilience and guile and persistence of the students has succeeded. Not only were we able to graduate students in July, here we are celebrating a work in progress show in 2021, still in lockdown, but looking forward to a new future post-pandemic. When I arrived on the course, I asked the staff and students to tell me what they felt the course was about. Apologies to those who've seen this before, but some of you will be new to the course. And I think it's important to remember that if you are a service designer, then you are curious. You have to be curious and find out what's really going on. And you then have to be courageous about telling the truth. This is what's happening. This is the insight we've gained. This is the evidence we have that will help us then collaborate together and create a better service, a better experience, transform, or make a design intervention. And those interventions are always dynamic. They flex and they move. They're always innovative and they always transform. Students are centered on people. That's society, community, individuals, and the systems we work in, the ecosystem of the planet. And every single project you'll see in this WiP show has a tremendous sense of purpose. We're very proud of all the projects we have on show here. It's been wonderful to get the positive feedback from people who've been coming in and looking at these projects on these 6 themes: social resilience and impact, which we'll be looking at later on today, sustainable solutions. Sustainability is always a great driver of our creativity and service design outputs. New interactions, a new area of post-COVID, post-touch interface. What do we do with gesture and voice? And these projects explore different ways of interacting with services. People-powered health, we kicked off yesterday 3 projects on the topic of genomics, incredible scientific advance, not necessarily matched by how we interact with humans. And these 3 projects are all at the moment being embraced by the NHS and looking for delivery. And citizen-centered, we looked yesterday at how projects bringing students and universities together, how regenerating our high streets that have been decimated by the pandemic, and looking forward to a future, as all these projects do, of what we do post-pandemic. And that is why we've called these projects Regeneration, and the students who are creating that regeneration, regeneration. The point of these shows is actually to get a chance for you to talk directly to our students. But we do that by luring you in with some amazing speakers. So in each of the events, the ones we had yesterday, the ones we have today, right now, future work, social resilience and impact a little bit later on today, and our two final events tomorrow, divide up these amazing projects, bring inspirational people to talk about them, and then give you a chance to look at those projects on our website, rcaservicedesign.com, which is dedicated to service design, allows you to explore each of the projects and acts as an archive to previous projects, last year's graduates and last year's WiP show. And we will, at the end of today's event, post in the chat a link to RCA Service Design Speak to the Designers. And what that is a series of links to each one of the projects where you can go and directly talk to the team that will be waiting in their Zoom rooms. And obviously today, the three projects we're highlighting, the Future of Work projects, will be the focal point of that. But you can make a Calendly invite, or you can just click on that link and see if somebody's there, as if they were standing by their booth in the Royal College of Art. They're now doing that virtually, waiting to speak and to share their ideas and creativity with you. So here we are today to discuss the future of work. Three fascinating projects you're going to hear about and three fascinating speakers. The future of work, as you will hear, is a speculative design project. And increasingly over the last 2 years, the 2 years that I've been working here, we've seen speculative design as becoming quite a natural tool to services, to service design, a tool that allows us to look at unintended consequences and then look back at how we need to design that service to take account of those, as well as the critical design approaches of design to kick the tires of things we think are marvelous and always benign, but maybe we don't understand where they're going to go. But this project has taken on speculative design, and we got three speakers to talk about that today. And then afterwards, you'll be hearing from the students of Generation Regeneration. And I really hope you enjoy the talks from, let's just remind ourselves, Marco Gillio from Boston Consulting Group and the Gaia Design Studio, from Chris Moore, an old friend of service design, through his consultancy ThoughtWorks. We're very proud of projects we've done with Chris and his company in the past, and Paul Neely, who's been part of this service design course for many, many years. And we're really delighted to welcome him back to come and speak on one of his many areas of expertise, which is speculative design. You don't need to hear any more from me. I'm going to pass over to Selena now and our first talk. Thanks very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the event.
Thank you, Clive. Just a few words. Thank you everyone for joining our Future of Work seminar. I'm assuming a lot of you are participating because you have been confronted with the question several times in the recent months or year, what work will look like post-COVID, having stirred up our ways of working, but also amplified and highlighted some of the issues of the traditional workplace and work structures. So as Clive mentioned, we have three speakers with three different points of view on this theme. We'll be reflecting on the workplace, current initiatives, new ways of thinking about organizational change, and optimizing for happiness in this complexity. In the end, we'll have three pitches of student projects who've been working in this realm for the past 3 months and try to imagine more speculatively, as Clive mentioned, what the workplace several years out in the future could be. And it is exciting. There will also be a Q&A session in the end, but please feel free to write your questions in the chat box underway and we'll respond to them. And then I hope today can add to some of the reflections that you might have had and perhaps provide some solutions as well. Lastly, the event is roughly an hour and a half, but please do feel free to stay around if you have the extra time and interest and be invited to discuss personally with the student projects. We'll send more links to these in the end. So if Marco is ready, let's begin the talks.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank all the students for providing insights and sharing their work together with us in BCG in our last workshop for employee experience and visioning. I'm very happy to join you today, and I will spend just a few words to introduce myself. My name is Marco Gillio, and I'm a designer. As managing director for design and engineering in BCG Platinum, we strive to grow a design culture within BCG and to promote an integrated approach for any innovation challenge. Of course, this challenge is not trivial because BCG has outstanding methodologies to deliver all the expected results, while design methodology drives the unexpected. So it's not that simple for us. But luckily, we are not alone in doing this, and we are part of a community of designers, of more 100 designers globally that help us in doing this. And my proposal for our chat today is talking about a little bit about foster a better future, about work, and about envisioning a new role, a new meaning for the physical spaces, the physical, let's say, offices. I want to unveil in advance my point of view, my thesis. We have a concrete opportunity and an enormous acceleration at the moment in design a future in which technology will help to unlock people potential and to enforce specifically human capabilities. And we will do this by adopting a human-centered design approach. This is an enormous opportunity for us as designers, in my opinion. This boring slide is just about saying this. Almost any designer, I think, sooner or later, wrote on his CV that we live at the intersection between business, technology, and people. But now, future become a new dimension to be considered. In my opinion, not really future, but the responsibility all innovators have to design preferable futures. And so this challenge is even more complex than before. By the way, the world became more and more complex. Markets are under disruption. There are new fast-changing technologies, new business models, social changes, sustainability issues of any kinds, now the COVID, and companies to stay on the market and need to find new meanings, a new promise to make to their customers and to their employees also in response to their current or latent needs. Many of these companies are trying to get out from being a commodity, like telco, energy providers, banking and insurance, etc. And they are seeking for an innovation of meaning, a new role to play in the market and in the society. It's innovation. I think it's a necessity. We are pushed to change, but our striving to survive. And as there is no innovation without adoption, we already learned that we need to enter the innovation challenge from the people side. But looking to this, asking ourselves what is really relevant for people, I think that I remember that there was a great communication experiment run by HBO in last Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, in which HBO launched a new movie series where data chooses the best path for people. I remember, unfortunately, in the interest of time, I cannot show the movie that they used to make this launch. But I think that it was very interesting because the company in the movie, called Insight, will decide everything in our place because they own all the data about our lives. The insight is frightening. Technology has progressively freed people from the heaviest task. Then technology freed people from those less and less relevant, up to operate better than humans, even in decision-making and other typical human roles. The promise is to free our time, but to use it where? What can we do with this time? Many thinkers predict that artificial intelligence will push out more and more people from productive roles. So masses of people will become useless. people will also be less and less relevant as consumers too, because advanced technology will make it increasingly possible to reach markets that exceed the capacity to offer. If many industries are commodities for us, are we commodities for them too in this vision? Okay, let's look a bit forward. In my opinion, I guess that people are far out from being a commodity. They are more and more relevant, and they are even moving from seeking for great experience. They are looking for a new alliance with companies in order to find new meanings and to have an impact on society and to play a role in the battles they believe in. This kind of new alliance is a new scenario for companies. And I think that in this scenario, companies are not seeking anymore to change, to look for new solutions, but also they really want to become resilient towards unpredictable futures. And they are seeking a sort of infrastructure, a culture, skills to cope with complexity, to uncertainty. And we can say they are looking for a sort of infrastructure for the future. In the same time, most companies need to embrace a bigger challenge, as we said before, and to choose which future they are willing to fight for. They have to explore their identity and to define future scenarios, to understand which role they can play in that scenario, and they have to meet employees and customers willing to join their mission. Just thinking on this, I think that we can easily understand that we need to talk to re-envision the future of work. Future of work that, as we know, were at the moment, the leadership models that are running at the moment were designed a century ago, when managers and supervisors watched over their subordinates. And over the past 30 years, we have seen some incremental improvement. Nevertheless, most of the workforce still meets at the same place at the same time, and managers continue to expend most of their energy on managing tasks. Necessity was a great catalyzer, as usual, by the way. And today leaders must quickly learn how to manage workforce that are fragmented across location and time zone. Instead of focusing on supervising and overseeing, leaders must set objectives, modularize the work, and enable teams. And so in this situation, I think that we will not return to the past, and work will not be back as it was before, located in the same place at the same time. Nor I do believe that we will move to the opposite extreme, where work will be entirely remote. I think that people may still need or want to meet physically in order to collaborate, co-create, and congregate. In this research, you can see that the most relevant need that still is not provided by digital is having this capability of collaboration and co-creation, and stay together. It will be mostly relevant for this kind of activities. Employees have already gained a remote skill, and future work will be hybrid, and real estate reduction will not be the primary driver, even if at the beginning it was, or it seemed to be. But the necessity of change, the need to learn how to be resilient toward unpredictable future, it will. And in this scenario, I think that we can open the door thinking on three main pillars. Of course, there is the employee experience that need to be redesigned, and we have to rethink on how to affiliate, to engage, to measure, to train, to give feedback, to promote creativity, and promote fulfillment to our employees. And in this new context, and with their new capabilities, we need to redesign the employee journey. Let me give an example. We all experience, I think that we all had the experience in this period of time of the several attempts to keep going as usual. So to keep people feeling part of a community, we make virtual beers or stuff like this, virtual parties. But to drink a beer in front of our computer is not the same to do it like if we were in presence, of course. And the mimic of traditional affiliation approaches drives to feel over-connected more than engaged, and shift the investment. And also, I think that this shift the investment of the engagement from the company that should have this kind of investment towards the employee that need to do this in his free time. So these early affiliation approaches are perceived by employee with indulgence maybe, yet a growing sense of fatigue. We don't need to mimic old experience, we need to design a new one. At the same time, we need to rethink which is the role of the physical presence and the role of physical space in these new scenarios. And we are plenty of opportunity, starting from the point that one of the most probable use of the physical space will be promoting creativity, having space for innovation or for connection or for collaboration. In this case, we also saw that most of the previous experimenting to run in that direction usually failed. We have some research from Politecnico Milano University that show how all the spaces for innovation create great and nice and beautiful offices, but really didn't provide a real differential value in generating new ideas. Those ideas came at the same time as usual while we were working or running or dreaming at night or everywhere, but not really in that offices, even if they are fancy and nice. And the last point, I think we have to take in strict consideration, talking about future work, is purpose. Which are the meanings I'm seeking as an employee for my professional experience? Which are the mission I am joining while choosing a company? Which is our new alliance between employees and companies that will engage me apart having my compensation? As we are even more flexible than in the past, I think, and also knowing that our new generation are even more sensitive on the topic of meaning, I think that we need to really take in consideration to focus the purpose of company and to design employee experience and physical spaces strictly connected as a representation or a concretization of this purpose. And so I just move, of course, talking about these two topics, we are setting a lot of tools to redesign employee experience. We are working in BCG in designing new kind of personas that are at the intersection of employee archetypes and behavioral archetypes with both data and ethnographical approaches together. We are scouting technologies and tools, rituals, policies, to design a new employee experience. But now I would like to spend some more minutes envisioning together and having a quick talk on the role of space. So the challenge in this case, I think, is to define which place, physical or digital, will unlock people potential, to help company to innovate, to prosper in the unpredictable, to generate a culture that will help them to face unpredictable future scenarios. We call it this concept bionic playground. And to arrive to a definition of a concept, we try to start from a shared set of beliefs, a sort of manifesto in which we highlighted some 5 beliefs that are at the base of a concept of a new space redesign. I propose to read them, to pass through them quickly with you, just to see if there is a fitting for you in this and the new spaces redesign. The first one is unlock people potential is the core. As we said, most of the space for innovation failed their mission. I guess the reason why is that they had the wrong focus. This space is focused on innovation, but innovation is not the scope. Innovation is the result. The focus should be on empowering typical human capabilities and talents. So the focus should be on people. The second point is insights are everywhere. Our iconic double diamond is perfectly symmetrical designed, but it is not like this in the most of the real experiences. I guess that the divergent phases in which we understand real needs, we explore different solutions, are usually as small as this, very thin. But in the divergent phases, we generated the most of the value. So I think that these kind of spaces should provide contents and help us to open the divergency towards the outside and generate new insights and new experience for the people that are living in these spaces. I know that it's very difficult to promote divergence because we need to challenge our previous conviction coming from our experience, assumptions, solution we already envisioned, and stuff like this. This is a reason why most of the time innovation comes from outside, from startups, from students, from people new in the industry, and so on. I remember that Pablo Picasso said that every act of creation begins with an act of destruction, and destruction of our assumption may be a starting point. The third belief is diversity nurtures creativity. For us, I think it's quite obvious. And I think about how creativity works. You mostly put together different existing bricks in an original combination. You need as many as different bricks you can find. So I also loved very much the quote of Philippe Le Petit, the acrobat that in 1974 made the crossing between the Twin Towers in New York and was arrested, when he says that the creativity is illegal. I think that this is because it needs to break some rules to be creative. And the fourth point is the experience is the way. Experience is the most immediate way to understand and to empathize. And it is the emotional content of the individual experience that immediately give us the meaning of an idea or of a solution and help us to share and test and improve. And I think that we all have a clear understanding of the power of making ideas visible and tangible, and how to use them to demonstrate instead of describe. And the last one is flexibility face complexity. I think that as the world became more and more complex, we shouldn't try to simplify it. Simplification often drives to bad results, even to violence, according to Amartya Sen. And so I think that we need to embrace complexity. And maybe to do this, we need to move from seeing the problem from different angles and different zoom in, zoom out, and doing like this. And this is the beliefs that we shared in order to create a new concept that I will present you in the moment. And this is. The idea is to define which is the mission and the role of the physical space according to be a space for innovation respecting these beliefs. In my opinion, this space has the role of providing serendipity through technology. It means that it will expose you to an incredible number of contribution, connection, contacts, inspiration. And at the same time, leverage on the physical or the physicality to boost understanding. As we said, physical experience is super effective to really understand and empathize or understand technologies by trying, understand context, inside solution, and moving through personal experience and interaction. By the way, I just discovered a few months ago that serendipity is a completely invented from scratch word coming from Horace Walpole, that is a novelist that wrote the first horror novel in the Romantic Age that was set in Italy, in Otranto, the Castle of Otranto, and he invented this word coming from the kingdom of Serendip, that is a place in his novel. That's the idea of at the basis of these spaces. Of course, this is my last slide. There are some topics that are strictly connected to this role of the space that we should and could explore, and we are now creating a lot of concepts on these 9 capabilities that should be provided from this kind of spaces. Something like extending co-working, capability to work seamless in the space, so you can have capacitative webcams that follow you in the space, ambiental microphones in order that you are free to speak and move in the space while talking, not to stay just in front of the computer. You can have windows like wall that are on other offices in the world, so you can meet by chance people that are moving on that offices, like if they were in your own. You can have a lot of innovative solution to generate insights, to manage knowledge and record knowledge that is provided and productive in the place. And also you can use in a provocative way tools like art that is, in my opinion, very relevant to push boundaries and to open the border to exploration, creating a non-mediate way to touch topics that you are not used to touch. I think that this is just an overview about the concept that we are promoting at the moment, and I will be happy to talk about this with all of you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marco. Very interesting. Looking forward to see where BCG Opinion is going in this realm. And I think it's true what you say, that we have to reinvent a new working space and not try to imitate the traditional one in the online, because at some point it does get tiring to have a virtual beer. Okay, well, let's move on to Chris Moore.
Hello, shall I share?
Yes.
It says I cannot share while other participants are sharing. Okay, Marco, I think that
I cannot. Okay. Yep.
All good. All right. Okay, can you hear me all right? And can you see my screen?
Yes.
So thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. This is very exciting and a theme that I'm particularly interested in. My name is Chris Moore, and the title of this presentation is Perspectives and Paradigms on the Future of Work. I'm a business analyst. That's my job title, but it sort of belies the complexity of what we think about in our work today. I work for an organization called ThoughtWorks, but I'm also a research student at the Royal College of Art, pursuing a PhD, and I'm in about year 3 at the moment. And before I begin, I just want to say thank you to Marco. There was lots in what you said that hopefully you will see sort of reflected in what I'm going to talk about as well. And the future of work is something that obviously is in the future, but I'm going to probably talk a lot about the past as well, because I think that there's something that we can learn from the past that helps us to think about the future too. And I may draw upon my own experiences in the world of work as well. After all, I think we're all case studies in the future of work. About 15 years ago, I was having a conversation with an HR director at the place at which I worked at the time, and we were discussing the cost of attrition. In other words, the cost to an organization of a person leaving. And he put a price on that. He put a price on the cost of somebody that's sort of roughly in the middle tier of an organization, of a reasonably sizable organization, is about £30,000 to replace, which was a bit of a surprise to me. But what was really intriguing was what he then said, which was that in the future of work, this is going to become an increasing problem for organizations, because people's job tenures will shorten, and because the world of work will become more fluid and the workforce will move around a lot more. And so organizations will struggle to retain talent and keep people within the organizations. And this is really what sort of sparked my interest in the question of what is the future of work, is the question, what's the future of the relationship between the individual and the organization? And, you know, should it be that organizations try to retain people for long periods of time, or is it actually more healthy if we have a movement of people through different organizations and through different periods of their lives? So to try to sort of to visualize this, I was doing some research about the sort of trends, and so I went back a few generations first to try to understand what are the patterns that existed in previous generations in their working lives. So this is a picture of a sort of generalized picture of the pattern of work for somebody that was born in the 1930s and 40s. So for that generation, for a man, you were born, you had a preschool period of your life, and then you went to school. And when you were at school, you were asked a question: what do you want to be when you grow up? And typically you would decide on something which would then determine where you went to college, what kind of education you had, or whether you went to an apprenticeship or even didn't go to either of those, but went straight into work. And so typically for a man of this era, you would then go into work and possibly have 2 or 3 different kinds of roles, but your job would be broadly the same. And you may even spend your entire life working in the same organization. At the end of that, you would draw down your pension and you would retire, and everything would be lovely, particularly if you actually survived the national average age limit for life expectancy for a man of that era. For a woman, the pattern begins the same, but the question is different when you go to school. The question might be, do you want to be a nurse? Do you want to be a teacher or a bank clerk? So clearly society wasn't really thinking very broadly about the role of women in the world of work at this stage. And so typically the opportunity to educate for a place of work was less for women, and the opportunity to work was less before their role changed and their full-time work became more about parenting and about upbringing children. And so quite often what would happen, and we can see this because this is all empirical evidence from the past now, is that for many women, the post-raising children would be a period of a patchwork of part-time work until they reached retirement age, which was earlier than men, at which point they would draw down on the pension that was shared between a man and a woman, typically in a marriage. If we fast forward to the next generation, which is broadly my generation, we can already see that, and this is true, you know, that the job tenure shortens and that there are more changes in our career, and we move around and our job titles become less predictable. But what's interesting here is that we already see that the need for education occurs throughout our lives, and the need to re-evaluate what we do and what we think about and what makes us relevant within the place of work. And again, I'm a case study here. I'm a proof of that point because I'm back at college. That's why I'm talking to you now. I'm both at college and I work as a professional at the same time. The question that starts to arise is what happens towards the end of life here, where there's greater uncertainty as whether we are going to have pensions that can sustain us. And indeed, with an aging population, whether we need to actually consider continuing to work in some way, shape or form in order to survive. What you'll also notice here is that the pattern for women of this generation is broadly the same as it was for the previous generation. Society is yet to really embrace a very equal view in the world of work. But you will see like little signals of how organizations are starting to change their view as to how they relate to their workers. So for example, when my children were born, I had 2 weeks of paternity leave. Fantastic. I was allowed off for 2 weeks when my children were born. Amazing. Now, if we go forward to the generation of my children, the generation of people who are sort of emerging from education now and starting to go into the world of work, this becomes a more speculative picture. But based on the things that we know and that we can observe in the way that organizations are beginning to change and beginning to think about the different relationship between an organization and people that work within the organization, we can see that the edges become a bit more blurred. Even in early childhood, we can see that that early childhood period blurs into education. And this is because the world of information and knowledge is available to us now through the internet. And we know that even at 3 years old, between 70 and 80% of children have access to the entire world of knowledge. So in a sense, education starts to blur between early childhood and into school. What we also see already is that the shift in emphasis on the way that the education system works, such that for many people around the world, particularly in places like this country, the student now has to incur a huge bill to pay for their own education. And actually, this means that they have to start to take on work at the same time as going through an education system. So there's a blurred boundary between work and education. And many organizations are starting to reach into places of education institutions in order to create new relationships between work and education. And so we can speculate that as we go into the future, jobs will have softer edges and people will maybe work in 1 or 2 different jobs at the same time. But certainly there will be a greater requirement for education and for learning and for re-evaluation to continue as part of our working lives. And so that relationship between learning and working starts to blend as well. In a report that was published by the World Economic Forum, it was also said that a really important part of future society will be how we mentor each other as well, because the design of education systems as they stand today simply won't be able to sustain the demand on re-education. So it will be upon us all as we go through our working lives to also be mentors for other people as they come through their working lives too. And of course, the question then increases as to what the aging population's demand upon society is, and whether it's sustainable for people to actually retire and draw down a pension, or whether they still need to consider smaller chunks of work that exist within their lives right through their entire lives. So we can continue to speculate this and say, well, what might it look like for children that are born in the 2020s, the 2030s, people yet to be born? And if we extrapolate out the same sort of thought process, then the conclusion is that simply these boundaries become more and more blurred between these different states, between education, between work, between learning, and between taking time out. Retirement isn't something we wait for at the end of our lives, but we may take chunks of time out at different points in our lives to address the balance between work and parenting and mentoring and so on. And perhaps one final point to say about this is that increasingly, as the world recognizes and society recognizes the importance of diversity, it begs the question then really how policy changes within places of work towards people. I mean, for example, everybody should be able to take effectively a maternity leave when they bring children into the world, however they choose to do that, and from whatever gender they are. And so perhaps we can then speculate that the only really concrete aspects of our lives are both the beginning and the end. And really, we then exist in these clouds of different activity, human activity. And so the interaction between these becomes the places where we exist for much of our lives. We're not just at work, we're not parents, we're not simply on holiday, and we're not at college just at the beginning of our lives, but we're constantly thinking about different interactions and different portions of our lives that bleed into each other. So my interest in the future of work is fueled by 2 things. One is the compelling the call to action that we need to be intentional and consider the possible outcomes of the future of work rather than letting things take their course unchecked. The World Economic Forum puts it this way: it is imperative that governments, business, academic institutions, and individuals consider how to proactively shape a new positive future of work, one that we want rather than one created through inertia. To me, this is both a design challenge and a systems challenge. It is design because design processes help us unpack the future possible states, and systems because the underlying forces that drive this change is the effect of systems shifting from being complicated to complex. Dr. Daniel Weil, a systems thinker and academic whose work is concerned with how we think about complexity to address society's most pressing issues, describes design this way. Design is human intention realized through interaction, which seems to me to be an appropriately wide definition that is fit for purpose that design now needs to step up to. Through all these dimensions, there become more nuanced arrangements between people and organizations that will call for more diverse definitions when it comes to the notion of who we are working for and what the value exchange really is. And all these dynamics are what systems thinkers describe as feedback loops. That is to say, the more that we accelerate change through rapid evolving technology, the more we create new arrangements between people and work. And the more we create new arrangements between people and work, the more we need rapidly evolving technology. The other more fundamental reason why the future of work hooks my curiosity is a fascination with the paradoxes, ambiguities, and contradictions that we see emerging as a result of the ever more rapidly changing technology landscape impacting our relationship with work, and therefore organizations of work and how we think about that. To give you an example, I spent 25 years working in newspapers, and much of that time was engaged in various projects implementing new technologies and organizational change strategies intended to improve the way that organizations worked. And by improve, we meant make it faster, make it more efficient, make it less costly. How could we produce a paper in less time? But the paradox was that while we continually improved technology, it always took all day to produce a newspaper. Looking back, I now realize that this paradox perfectly captures the difference between complicated and complex, a distinction that we really need to understand when we consider the future of work. To explain what I mean, a newspaper production system is a highly complicated array of processes and systems that are tightly knitted together, but that are predictable in their behavior. But if you contrast this with news itself, it is a continuous narrative of unpredictable events beyond control of the organization that are unfolding every minute and thwarting any attempt to make production and distribution of news any more efficient. Another paradox that I often pondered throughout that part of my career was that the more systems became sophisticated, the harder it was to define where the boundaries existed between one process and another, and between one role and another. Essentially, boundaries become more blurred while the people try to maintain structures that they had been used to in the past. This was never a satisfactory arrangement, leading to tension between ambiguity and a desire for clarity. Today, when we observe relationships between people and organizations, we can see many dimensions through which shades of gray prevail. More edges blurred between what was once clear organizational domains now need to be reconsidered and redesigned and rethought. Leadership is a good example. Leadership, for example, was something that seemed to always exist at the top of an organization, but increasingly with self-organized teams, we talk about leadership being pushed to the edges of the organization. And yet leadership still needs to be something that commands some sort of coherence through an organization at the same time and steers a course of direction. And place, now more than ever, particularly through COVID, we are all experiencing having to work in very different places. And closely related to that is time. So if we are working for a team that is distributed into many different places in different time zones, then it is unlikely that our work exists in a nice, neatly packaged 9-to-5 slot. In fact, 9 to 5 really doesn't mean anything anymore. And as well as having to work in different time zones, we may work asynchronously, where the work itself detaches itself from different people throughout stages of the day and follows the sun, as we like to call it. Commitment. Because of the more complex demands of life in general, organizations have had to increase the diversity of arrangements with people, no longer just a case of full-time versus part-time. Some people will take extended periods of leave, but remain part of an organization or may have more than one job at the same time. And this is where I am a case in point as I sit here and talk to you about this now, as I explained earlier. Domain is another area where the boundaries become blurred. Whilst there may be people that are domain specialists in different business areas, whether you're a lawyer or a chef, there is another whole strata that underpins business, which is that of technology, so that there are specialists emerging in areas like search and data analysis or identity management, which are really domain agnostic. So part of an organization's workforce is much more fluid than another part, which begs the question, where is the organizational knowledge staying? And recruitment is another one where organizations are having to change the way they think about recruitment. Back to my original point, it's no longer a case of identifying a job vacancy, then putting out an ad. Now organizations need to reach out and talk to people and have conversations way before they actually know whether there's a perfect fit. And likewise, individuals are having conversations with organizations through various channels, whether that's events or through social media, which means that we are constantly becoming more and more connected between organizations and individuals, even though we don't necessarily work for them. Consider the economy. We used to use the economy as the shorthand for the pulse of monies exchanged through the financial veins of business. But this has become diversified into various flavors through an array of prefixes such as knowledge, gig, experience, circular, platform, digital, sharing, and attention, among many others. These alternative prefixes are an indicator of how we try to make sense of the new complex arrangements between human effort and gain. To reduce the value exchange between the individual and the organization to purely financial in nature is vastly oversimplifying what is really inseparable, i.e., the work we do and the resultant world we want to live in. Perhaps a work-life balance is less about switching off at the end of the day and more about ensuring that the work and life are in tune and one enriches the other. The Fordist model of value exchange, my time for your money, is redundant in a complex, hyper-connected world where we are online for most of our waking hours, and expected to bring our whole selves to work. Activist and documentary filmmaker Astra Taylor goes further when she describes the digital feudalism of social media, where, as she puts it, sites like Facebook offer up land for content providers to work while platform owners expropriate value with impunity. In other words, as well as those for whom we have chosen to work, we now find ourselves working for others by creating for free the content required for them to sell eyeballs to advertisers, as we sow our interactions with the new form of business model, the platform. The platform has become a new design for value exchange, enabled by a plethora of loosely coupled technologies that bring together previously disconnected groups of people. While new digitally native businesses emerge to take full advantage of the 21st century, other organizations who built their wealth through more traditional linear production methods clamber to get in on the act for fear of extinction, and as they struggle to fit their square peg business models into new round holes of opportunity. So how should we think about designly ways about thinking about the future of work and organizations? One aspect of the creative mind that is particularly useful here is the ability to use analogy and metaphor as a way of sense-making our changing relationships with organizations. Lakoff and Johnson, whose work examines the systemic nature of metaphor in the way we conceive meaning, assert that metaphor is not just a superficial way to describe things, but that metaphor and analogy are central to our whole system of concepts by understanding one thing in terms of another. And design is no stranger to metaphor, its lateral nature making it highly complementary in the designerly way of knowing. The overarching metaphor for work through the industrial era was the machine, embodying notions of predictability, linear logic, and cause and effect. More recently, organizational theorists and practitioners agree that organization as a living system is a more appropriate metaphor, and this makes sense in so many ways. Every living organism, every living cell within that organism is, in a sense, at work. It has to perform some sort of function in relation to the organisation of which it is a part in order to maintain its own living state. Cells, organs, and organisms are no different to people, teams, and organisations in their recursive nature. That is to say, we can observe the same pattern at every level throughout the organisation. And crucially, in both cases, they are dependent upon the environments in which they exist. But if we are to understand complex organizations, as achieved through metaphor and analogy, then we must end with one that illustrates one of the core properties of complex systems. It is often said that complex systems are greater than the sum of their parts. That is to say, that beyond the parts that make up the complex system, there emerges a meta-system that only exists when the parts are working together. To illustrate this conundrum, the Austrian-born American physicist Fritjof Capra puts it this way. If we consider the molecular structure of sugar, it is made up of an arrangement of carbon and hydrogen molecules. None of these are sweet and in and of themselves. Yet when they are arranged in the appropriate way, sweetness emerges. Perhaps this is what we must seek in the intentional design of the future of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was very interesting. I like your last quote to end things off. That was very cool. And I think it's also important for people working in the space to look historically at our relationship with work in order to imagine the future. And how COVID, our relationship with work has been changing all along, but COVID is more an amplifier and has made it obvious for all parts of an organization. Thanks a lot. Now we will move on to our last speaker, Paul.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about designing for happiness in a complex world. And this is a project that I've been working on for kind of the last 10 years and has sort of picked up steam in the last year and a half or so. I'll share a little bit about my background in speculative design and some of the ideas around speculative design, just a few points that help set up how this project came about. And I think it's just important notes as we're thinking about the future of work. So in terms of hats, I teach. I have the opportunity to engage with the Royal College of Art on the service design course. I also teach at a School of Critical Design where we work with organizations on applied speculative design and building speculative design into their business functions. I run a consultancy, a design consultancy, Neely Worldwide, where we apply speculative design and service design. And then I sort of have an entrepreneurial bent as well. I'm working on a project called Parlia, where we're looking to improve civil discourse. And then this project that I'll share with you today, Masamichi Sozo, looking at the optimization of happiness. So with Neely Worldwide, again, we're very interested in both service design and speculative design. We've worked on projects with Mercedes-Benz on the future of mobility. I've worked with Mercy Hospital in the States on the world's first virtual hospital, delivering telemedicine to a regional area. I've worked with the Policy Lab on shifting from treatment of homelessness to looking at identification of risk and prevention of homelessness. And I'm very interested generally in how these approaches can create meaningful impact within organizations and within the world. And a big question that drives a lot of our work then is how can we better understand and create the future? So again, speculative design is the approach that we generally use and deploy. And for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with the approach, I'll just give three kind of notes that might frame this for you as you're thinking about these questions of the future. So the first, again, is for me is the approach of speculative design, and I define it as the design of future products and services to explore the implications of emerging technology or trends. So we're designing actual concrete products or services that could exist that the company could deploy within a particular future, but we actually don't care at all really about what those concepts are. We're not interested necessarily in the concept car. We're more interested in using the concept car to understand the implications of the technology, the trends, the impact that might have on the world and how things shift around it once that exists. Those insights allow us to do all sorts of interesting things and ask new types of questions and find new types of value. And for me, a lot of this came out of the thinking from Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby, who I had the chance to study with on the Design Interactions course at the Royal College of Art. And one of the big things they realized is if you decouple design from the current needs of today and of industry, you're able to use those techniques to ask all sorts of interesting questions. So instead of sort of slave to industry, tied to the current needs of the business, as we see in column A, when you decouple that, we start asking all sorts of looking at other issues. So we're now problem finding, we're asking questions, we're in the service of society rather than industry. We're looking at implications rather than applications, satire, the citizen rather than the consumer, the person rather than the user, and really a way to provoke our thinking. Another point that I like to share often, and why I think speculative design is so important, is the idea of Amara's law. And Amara's law is the idea that when we generally look into the future, we think in linear terms. And when in reality, most technology and most change is happening in exponential terms. And what this means is, in the near term, we're disappointed and we're dismissive of emerging technology or trends. But in the medium to long term, we radically underestimate the shifts that are taking place. And so most of my work with organizations is trying to help them spend time out in the future with speculative design to prepare for that inflection. And so they have a sense of that future moment, and they're not caught off guard. They don't underestimate the shift. And they're not dismissive of it in the near term, but they actually begin to prepare for it in meaningful ways. And so Masamichi Sozo is a project that actually emerged from this type of thinking and from speculative design. And I was working at the time with a particular problem called computational irreducibility. And this is the idea that in a very, very complex system, in many cases, you can't actually simplify the system. You can't throw things out and abstract it, because what you're doing every time you simplify, you're actually throwing out bits of critical information, and your representation is not the system. And so whatever you design for and whatever you try to create, when you put that back into the complex system, we don't know what you've actually done. We don't know if you've improved things. We don't know what you've damaged. We don't know, what the outcome will really be. And yet this is how we do all of our design in business. We always simplify and abstract and then think we're creating new solutions. So I became interested in what happens if we do the opposite of that. What happens if we actually consider everything, take into account everything within the system, do not abstract, do not simplify, and then try to address what's going on. And what was interesting in that exploration is I realized the motive, the intent changes. Where before I was interested in efficiency and profit, in faster, better, stronger, slower, smoother, whatever the design intent was. Now I realize actually the only reason I'm undertaking those things is because I believe we'll be better off or happier by achieving that thing. And so what happens if I ignore the simplifications that are looking at parts and I focus the entire system on designing for happiness? And so as part of this sort of exploration, I said, well, what does the future look like when the entire world is designed for happiness? And I began some sort of personal explorations looking at the happiness model and how it actually works in my brain and what's actually driving these types of behaviors. I began measuring sort of a quantified self approach, measuring all different aspects of my life, including my happiness on a daily basis to try to understand what's driving it and how things are shifting. I undertook all sorts of different personal experiences looking at sleep and movement and air quality and food and my relationship with material possessions. And all of these experiences gave me a lot of data, but completely transformed how I think about happiness and how it works. I realized most of my beliefs about the sort of good life and about the meaningful life have been designed for me by organizations who are not optimizing for happiness, but are optimizing for profit. They're creating environments for me that actually exploit me and drive me to certain ends. And when you begin to throw some of those things off, as many different disciplines of life and many different kind of thinkers have discovered, you realize there are types of happiness that can be achieved outside of those systems, and that most of the world is actually antithetical to happiness. Our optimizations of parts do not create an optimized whole. They create one that is devastating for human happiness and well-being. And that continues as long as profit and sort of short-term thinking drive much of our decision-making. So I actually realized, this was actually a future exploration, but I realized actually, there's no reason a lot of this thinking needs to sit somewhere in the future. And decided that actually we could create an organization that would help realize some of these ideas now. And so Masamichi Sozo is a company that looks to help individuals sort of design their lives using design techniques for the optimization of their own individual happiness, helping people sort of walk through maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs to identify where they can make improvements. It also looks to be a sort of protector. Not that most of the organizations in the world are bad, but their optimizations for profit don't actually care about you, and they're in parts, they're not holistic. So Apple will sell me another iPhone and they don't care if it's my last few quid in my pocket. They don't care about the amount of sleep I got. They don't care about my relationship with my mother. All of these things that may drive happiness more than the ownership of a particular technology. We're starting to see some shifts there, but it's still very, very tiny in terms of the actual potential for happiness. So we look to be a sort of mitigator of these relationships and try to help people navigate all of the messaging that's competing for attention and competing for use of the individual and trying to make the individual happy. We have a definition of happiness that aligns with a lot of the research, but again, an emergent feeling that indicates when our needs in terms of survival have been met. Happiness is an evolved sensation that we all live with. It's a balance of pleasure and purpose over time, a sort of stoic feeling of peace, calm, and contentment. And it's an outcome of daily behaviors, genetics, and ultimately context. It's not all on the individual, it's on the environment and ecosystem. And we're interested in the greatest amount of happiness for the longest period of time for the greatest number of people. So we believe that sort of interventions throughout an individual life can change this normal curve of happiness and actually increase it overall, increase the space below the curve over time. We engage in sort of 4 places: personal happiness design, organizational happiness design, a lot of this alignment with the future of work and the explorations here, and also civic happiness design, so looking at governments and bigger systems that have control over contexts that would impact happiness. We use design techniques. So why design the world for anything but happiness, and why not use all of these techniques we know to create products and services to actually improve happiness? The other thing I'll share is that we look to eliminate the profit motive in the way we create the company. So for example, we're not a charity, and the reason is that charities actually create profit or create tax incentives for people, and actually take important tax money away that could be for services that would support society. And in reality, the charity is pulling money away from those sort of fair use of and democratic use of taxes. So we look in everything we do as how we design the company to sort of make sure we're considering everything and building supporting the entire system in the creation of happiness. We build protocols for individuals and behaviors that are sort of researched and looking to improve individual happiness. We've built tools like Night Night Everyone, which is a small tool that helps put websites to sleep at night and encourage users to sleep, identifying that trade-off when an individual is the value that an individual could derive from your website is less than the value they could have by sleeping. So we're trying to create prompts and disconnections from technology and disconnections from optimizations of profit that actually will support the individual. And we've also, done consulting work now with individual organizations and workforces to improve happiness and well-being, but also have worked with small cities. One example is Scottsville, Virginia, where we worked with the mayor and the rural health team to look at a number of interventions to improve the happiness and well-being of the residents within Scottsville and the surrounding area. So we're working at again, different scales. So just by way of an example of some of that thinking around the future and what does a world optimized for happiness look like, and how that question can actually drive all sorts of new value today. The last points I'll just make, I'm quite excited to hear the students' pitches, and so I'll just make these share these ideas quite quickly. But another really important issue here when we're talking about the future of work and when we're talking about optimization of happiness is actually climate change. and I include this slide in every presentation I give, and probably have done for the last several years, but that whatever we're doing right now is probably not as important as addressing global warming. Climate change has, and this crisis has the potential, has probably already reduced global happiness in a way that's hard to fathom, but will continue to do so. And we're so far behind the curve. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, has said that any future that doesn't imagine or doesn't make central sort of climate change and the climate crisis will increasingly be seen as naive and almost a joke, because really it's the most important thing that's happening with technology, what we've done with technology and what we are doing with technology going forward. I've also heard Eric Holthouse say, a climate writer, suggest that the 2020s will has the potential to be the most transcendent in human history if we actually address these issues that are ahead of us. And it means everything has to change. We have to reimagine the entirety of society if we're to make these goals of a climate neutral world and keep warming below 1.5 degrees. And we're starting to see moments and glimmers of hope in this direction, but it's sort of overwhelming to think about. So just a sort of call out to make sure that that is part of all of our thinking going forward. So several ideas being shared here, and one, but just as kind of a wrap up and final thoughts, speculative design and this work of understanding the future and this exploration that the students have done here of the future of work, I think is absolutely critical. Speculative design creates valuable new meanings by helping us understand the future in new ways, by looking at the impacts and implications of emerging technology and trends. And for me, it absolutely needs to be normalized. This needs to be better built in and better understood and more regularly utilized by organizations around the world, and helping break us from the near-term needs of the market and allow us to think in a longer timeframes and that are more meaningful to us and to civilization. We also need to close the loop. So it's not enough just to have that sort of concept car, but we need really, really smart ways to take this thinking from the future and immediately apply it, make meaningful shifts in our behavior, our investment, the directions we're going because of this work we've done with this time we've spent in the future. Two insights from my practice: consider everything. One of the biggest and most interesting ways to change the way you're working is to radically expand your consideration set. So don't just think about the individual, don't just think about their job, don't just think about your business, don't just think about your community. By really considering the entirety and your piece within that changes the way we define value, we find opportunities, and changes all of the definitions that we have going forward. Universal responsibility. Once you understand your place in that world, take responsibility for all externalities, positive and negative, and not you're responsible for every part of your user's happiness, not just the profit that you can exploit from them. And by taking universal responsibility, that changes the way we design, and it creates some really interesting behaviors and new interactions for businesses and organizations. I love this exploration that the students have done on the future of work, and I think we're radically underestimating the change that is taking place. I think the world is generally, from universal basic income, AI and automation, this remote work, 4-day work weeks, and climate change, just climate refugees and the shift in populations around the world. I think the disruptions that are coming are potentially just incredibly overwhelming, and so this question of the future work has more and more value. And then ultimately, I'd suggest that skipping all of our sort of short design intent and sort of the smaller questions, and always build in what is designed for happiness, what are the new values, what is the new value that comes from focusing on designing for happiness. So thank you very much, and yeah, this was just a quick run through, but happy to continue conversations on designing for happiness. or application of service design and speculative design. And thank you to the students for organizing and for the chance to chat.
Thank you, J. Paul. I guess this is a perfect segue to the student pitches, and it's safe to say that we have all used, the 3 projects have used speculative design, so we have seen for ourselves how much value it can create. So we also agree on your last statement. But let me share my screen then. Can you all see this? Yes. If Aman is ready.
Yes, thank you, Selena, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Hello everyone, my name is Aman, and we are Team Invisible Value Income from RCA Service Design Cohort. Shout out to my team members, Yuan, Jing, Boshing, and Kotoko, who are here with us today. We are about to show you an outcome of a 14-week speculative design project in collaboration with the Fuzzy Studio, the Royal Society of Medicine, and more. We focused on building a preferred future state that visualizes and pays employees for the value they create outside of work. Our research found out 6 expectations of the workplace well-being that sets an ideal experience for employees at work. With these 6 expectations, we set out our design guidelines that cater to most users we interviewed and guide our prototyping session for the ideal future state. Our future state promotes values like inclusion, flexibility, de-gendered workplace environment for a healthier work-life balance among working parents. As we progressed, we understood that most of the invisible work in the home, such as childcare and housework, are the areas that are most relevant to the well-being issues caused to the majority of female working parents and will have the most significant impact to the society if explored. We created our future scenario based on what if invisible value, which is value created outside of work that isn't currently measured by an index, could be evaluated economically. You can find us in the link shared in the chat later for a quick conversation with our team. We'll be sharing our full presentation right after this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman. Next team.
Hello, we are SciHS team, and our project is the body of work presented as a provocation. So qualitative research and speculative design tools have been applied to create the rich understanding of the context and influences surround employees' well-being today, and the socio-technical opportunities may or may not improve in the future. So in-depth interviews and background research led us or how might we question, how might we create a work culture overwork where employees feel psychologically secure to work hard without exceeding the limit. So the major output from our project are the number one output is a framework for good mental health at work. This is from the around 6 principles can be used as focuses for on encouraging workplace cultures and practices benefit well-being for all.
So our output number 2 is the future cone. This depicts the direction of travel of workplace culture and technology. In it, we propose that preferred state might be one where cases of chronic workplace stress become so rare that independent investigations are required when they do occur. However, when we considered the role that technology might play in terms of how we measure the effectiveness of our framework and generate interventions from it, concerns were raised. So, output number 3 was 2 animated scenarios to convey these concerns for the near future. To maintain peak productivity, algorithms might advise us when and how to eat, work, exercise, and recover. Stress from overwork may be reduced, but the loss of free will and a high level of surveillance would become a new source of emotional discomfort. So if this is not the route to our preferred future, what is? 50 years ago, losing a finger, arm, or even your life during the course of your work received little sympathy. In the last 100 years, health and safety policy has developed to demand high standards of care for the physical well-being of employees. More recently, these policies have expanded to include statements regarding psychological care. However, in practice, the rates of work-related chronic stress are increasing. Ultimately, we concluded that to truly address mental health at work, particularly in the knowledge sector, it must be viewed in the same light as physical health is, in environments known to be physically hazardous. we'd love to share our work with you in more detail. Please come and have a chat with us after the session.
Thank you, Peter and Najim.
Thanks, Selena. So for us, it's all about overworking for the tech sector. Although tech industry seems to be one of the hottest sectors of attracting hardworking profiles, its workers are 5 times more depressed than the UK population. We found well-being initiatives such as flexible workspace, gym discounts, or regular socials aren't just not enough to compensate this high stress levels from our desk research and interviews. The causes of this stress are twofold. The sector is marked by rapid innovation cycles, tight VCs, deadlines, and intense workplace inherited from Silicon Valley startup culture. As the industry is very dynamic, employees sometimes struggle to know how and when to update their skills to stay relevant, resulting in feeling of job insecurity. This results in high demands put on workers and usually long work days. As a group, we choose to take a systematic approach to the issue of well-being and challenge the existing work hour model. We imagine a future scenario occurring in the 2030s based on the idea of a 3-hour workday. We took inspiration from trends around shorter work week, personalization of work hours, and predictions from the economist John Maynard Keynes. Research also shows that we are actually only productive for 3 hours per day on average when tech workers claim to be working more than 8 hours a day. Thus, we assume that with technological progress, people will be able to spot these 3 hours and imagine how it would look like in a fake company called Libratus. After showing this scenario to different audience, we created 6 principles suitable for HR teams within tech organization to apply to achieve better well-being at work. We used the 7S model for organizational change done by McKinsey to guide our thinking. To hear more about our research, see our detailed scenario and our principles, come to our Zoom room, afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, all teams. Okay, so we don't have much time left, but perhaps we could take a question or two. Is there anyone who would like to shout out a question, or should I go to the chat? Find something. I see that your son is here and saying it's a great presentation, Chris.
Yes.
I don't mind jumping in. Actually, I have a question that is linked to Richard's question in the chat or remark, but it's about meaning. I was wondering if there wasn't a sort of contradiction between companies trying to sell meanings to employees and people trying to look for a big meaning in what they work, in comparison to what Chris said about work being more blurred with other aspects of life. So my question is do we need to try and find a big meaning in work when actually there are all these different parts of life that also bring meaning? So if there wasn't a danger basically to sell meaning in work when actually there are all these other parts, and there might be a more pragmatic way to see your life by having all these different parts together bringing meaning. I'm just wondering, we talk about meaning all the time right now at work, but it feels like it's just one way to see meaning when actually different parts of life bring it as well. Yeah, it's open question remark. I don't know what you think about this, but curious.
Shall I respond to that? I think it's a great question, right? Meaning is a word that gets thrown around a hell of a lot these days in work, and I'm not sure there's a straight answer to this. It's a hugely complex issue, but I would put another word next to that, which is authenticity. I think the problem comes when meaning is packaged in some way within an organization, and then it becomes, it's the kind of difference between something actually having meaning and becoming commoditized. And I think some of these values that we talk about within organizations become commoditized. And that's the danger that we've always got to be aware of when we talk about these sort of values, the sort of softer edges of human experience within organizations. So I'm not suggesting I know the answer, but that definitely resonates with me, that question, because I see it in my own experience as much as anything.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Go for it.
I really enjoyed all three speeches. Thank you very, very much. When we kicked off the WiP show, we had Alice Rawthorne and Jeff Morgan, and they gave us really interesting, fascinating presentations you'd expect. And I asked the question, is the world ready for thinking about the future in time of pandemic? Are we scared of the future? Are we worried that any future speculation is not going to be relevant because something like pandemic comes along? Alice Rawthorne told me off immediately and said, no, that's wrong. Design is doing an amazing job speculating for the future. But I still worry that these messages aren't useful, or we don't know how to use these messages. And it's really a question to all three speakers. I know we haven't got that much time and it's a big question, but do you think the world's ready for this? And are we able to use it meaningfully?
I mean, I'll just share one thought on that. I think it's essential thinking. I think if anything, this pandemic is a small, is maybe small in terms of impact compared to some of the other things like climate disruption that are coming down the pipe. The other thing I'd say though is that I've seen in my practice is thinking about the future is really hard. I mean, and it's a discipline and a skill, and a lot of times. It's difficult to help people go into the future and then think about it and understand what it might mean. But then it's also, that's only half the journey. You have to spend a lot of time with people helping them come back and understand, well, what did we just learn there? And what does that mean? And how do we actually change things? So I think you're right. There is a lot of great thinking going on. I would agree with Alice, but I also think there's a huge amount of work by design and by other disciplines to be done to help translate that thinking into now and meaningful shifts now. And I would say that's a place where generally we're failing. There are amazing visions. There's a lot of talk, and design is having a heyday right now with speculation and futures. But I think the translation back, the closing of the loop back to the near term, there's still more work to be done there. But yeah, more futures, more we need.
That's brilliant. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. Marco, do you have an opinion?
I think this, that all this situation introduced fear, and fear is not really helpful for be creative. Maybe that they are antagonists, and it wouldn't help. But at the same time, it also introduced necessity, and I think in the battle of fear and necessity will win. And so it will be really helpful to promote a change and a focus on this topic. And at the same time, I know that most of the thinkers have a very pessimistic opinion about the introduction of the technology, weight, maybe that all the scenarios are not really pushing toward good thinking about creating a better place for work, a better place for humans. But in my opinion, I think that we will all wake up and strive for the challenges that really worth to be work on. And so I have, and I would like to stress, an optimistic point of view in which necessity will push all of us to think for a better place to work and to stay all together. And I guess this is my point.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Chris, did you have anything else to say before we?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I mean, we're all currently in this situation, which it brings about a lot of anxiety and fear. I mean, I guess I would say that I mean, there's a lot of research that suggests that a design mindset is effectively an optimistic mindset, and we have to focus on that. And to J. Paul's point, it's not just about kind of fantasy futures, but through design, we can bring those futures more into reality and present a positive future that we can work towards.
Yeah, thanks very much. We've got some good stuff in the chat as well, agreeing with you about climate change and everything. Selena, are we up on time now?
Yes, unfortunately.
No, fine, fine. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you. We all the people who have been on this call, a few people have dropped off as we run out of time. For those of you who remain, can I please encourage you to go to the chat and download that link. Speak to the designers, future of work. Even if you don't do it now, because you may be busy or you maybe need to go and get some lunch, I don't know, whatever, or a cup of tea. These students have worked really hard and they've worked through extraordinary times and they've kept going, and look at the quality of the projects and quality of thinking. I'm super proud of them. And I would really love you to go and talk to the 3 projects that we have here. That link will show you all the projects that we're showing in this work in progress show. We can't entertain you at the Royal College of Art, but we can entertain you here virtually and through the website. So if you can now, just spend 5 minutes talking to the students. If you can't, make an appointment, come back anytime, almost any time. 3 in the morning, they'll be there manning their Zoom calls and wanting to engage with you. And I think we all owe it to them as generation regeneration gets ready to reset the world. I'm really excited about what they're going to do. I'm really excited about the talks we've had today. Thank you so much, Jay, Paul, Marco, and Chris. Really, really fantastic. It's so exciting. It's an exciting time for service design. It's exciting to be talking about speculative design and seeing it be really a meaningful part of what we do. So thanks for all for bringing that to life. And thanks to the amazing students for showing us your projects, and everyone who's joined us today. Thank you very, very much. We always do this thing. Come off mute and give a round of applause, please, students. You don't hear that sound very often, so we try and recreate an experience of reality. Thank you again, everybody. Have a very good rest of your day. We have our next event at 1 o'clock on social resilience. Please join us for that. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for supporting the Royal College of Art Service Design Work in Progress show. Bye for now.
Thanks, Clyde.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Chris.